Are there ways I can leverage AI where I don't have to do this massive transformation? Really starting with what business problem are you trying to solve and focusing it around not technology, hammer looking for a nail. It's really what are we trying to solve? I think you're always going to have a human in the loop just because these are important decisions that you typically aren't going to want the system to do automatic.
What do you think is the most practical way to look at AI coming into this?
Welcome to StitchStudio's Pilot to Production. In this series, we're interviewing insurance executives, investors, and consultants to hear real stories of how the industry is operationalizing AI in insurance. From carriers and brokerages to technology partners and investors, you'll gain practical insights, implementation strategies, and lessons learned from the leaders driving enterprise-scale adoption, moving from pilots to implementing responsible, predictable, and explainable AI. I'm Karan Mishra, CEO of StitchStudio, and this is Pilot to Production.
So Michael, thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Very good.
Have this discussion. Pretty excited about it.
Yeah, fantastic. So, you've obviously worked very closely with insurers over the years, over the decades, right?
Yeah.
Like you've been at this a long time, modernizing systems, helping people go from the old to the new. What are some of the key lessons that stand out for you along the way that have been kind of key themes across any modernization, different periods we've gone through?
Sure. Yeah. And then again, I might date myself a little bit, but I was around when, for about 25 plus years, I've been helping carriers do transformations. And back in the day, when they were moving from the mainframes, now obviously they still have mainframes today, but moving from mainframes to client server, I was kind of an architect helping them build these modern systems. But back then we talked a lot about the illities.
Yeah.
But now the illities, I think, have come back with AI and Gen AI, but they're a little bit different. But what we keep seeing is, again, you need to be able to, predictability of the outcomes, right? People need to understand what data was used,
right,
what decisions were made because it's a heavily regulated environment, insurance. So they need to understand, how did we get to this decision? So that's very important. The auditability as well. We're really looking at what decision was made here, what data was used to make that. So that's important. And then because it's heavily regulated, you've got scalability and looking at how do these scale, especially when you can start something in pilot, but then if it can't scale in production, then you're going to have issues. So really seeing a lot of that come back, really looking at carriers are looking for assistance and how do they move those things from pilot to production. But it really comes back to some basic principles around things like auditability, reliability, scalability.
That's great. So as you look back over, again, whether it was the mainframe era, the SaaS era, the era particularly we're living in right now, as you look at those periods, can you think of any consistent themes or, again, lessons that would relate to the companies that crossed the chasm, right? That kind of got whatever it was operationalized, particularly AI, if you're seeing it, versus the ones that can't? Are there common factors in the planning or the companies?
Yeah, and I think a few things, right, come to mind. Well, one is, again, really starting with what business problem are you trying to solve and focusing it around, again, not technology, hammer looking for a nail.
Right.
It's really what are we trying to solve, because it's got to be anchored in that to really see the results of, how are you going to track? Did you get, value out of this implementation? So I think that's critical. Again, change management is a big part of this, especially when you're talking about AI, because a lot of these, they talk about automating certain processes, but there's generally always a human in the loop to really make those final critical decisions. So you've got to have, the people want to use these things, because otherwise, you're not going to get the adoption. You're not going to see that business value without having, that kind of change management, helping people understand why this is not replacing them. It's just taking away some of the more repetitive tasks to help typically drive a business outcome. And the last is data. Data is always key. But again, a lot of times garbage in, garbage out. But if you're feeding these models with data that's, not consistent, not valid, you're not going to get we're all focused on that business result. You're not going to see that business result.
Yeah. So your organization is all about helping companies not only select tech, but figure out the process with which they're going to go through, through their changes, right? And so I'm curious, like, as you're doing that, do you feel like it's better for companies to set up sort of like the whole AI roadmap, right? Like, let's figure out what we're going to do end to end over the next 5 years. Or is it better to say, look, a lot could happen in that period of time, and let's find that one friction point or two or three, right? That we know that will kind of help us adopt some practices. Like you're thinking about that like in a spectrum. What do you think works better?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always a balance, but again, 5 years in this day and age, I mean, who knows where we're going to be in 5 years with this tech, because it's evolving so rapidly. So, I mean, I think there are some key, as I talked about, some principles you need to lock in on to make sure that, again, you've got the governance, especially in insurance, because it's so heavily regulated. We've got to make sure that those building blocks are there. But then again, I like to start small, prove out the concept, get people on board. And then as you start to scale it over time, you can move to additional use cases and things like that. And that's why I think I'm seeing a lot of carriers now do that, starting with something either, again, a lot of it's in, I'll say, underwriting, really looking at how do we, again, take the underwriters and focus them on, really evaluating the risk, not going to try to rekey data, figure out if all the data is there. There's a lot of data out there that you can supplement these applications with. And in a lot of cases, we're helping carriers, the underwriters potentially will get something that's already rated and ready to go. And then they're really looking at, do I want to add an endorsement? Do I want to change something? Versus today, where I'd say 9 times out of 10, the apps coming in don't have all the data they need. Right. And so they're wasting their time trying to figure out, okay, well, where's this data? And that can add days to the process. So really what we're looking at is, hey, before it gets to that underwriter, let's, if all the data is not there, send an automated email back to the broker and say, hey, we need these 5 other things in order to complete the application. That way a lot of that work falls on the underwriters today. And these, they're highly valued resources. That's where we go to the underwriters and say, hey, we're not replacing, we're going to let you focus on growth and really looking at those things. And the other thing I'll add, also with the data and analytics, it's really helping those underwriters say, hey, what is in your appetite? If you've got 100 apps coming in, which are the 5 that, you're really going to write? So we look at a lot of data to say, hey, maybe this broker's has sent you 1,000 applications and only ever placed 1. Right. It's not maybe the first one you want to work on. And maybe, maybe the appetite's not there. So doing all of that stuff to really, and I'm focused on underwriting. Same process with claims as well, where, the claims handlers have to go through this mountain of data, look through all these reports. There's a lot of stuff you can do to summarize that, really focus them on how can they drive an outcome in this claim versus, going and rekeying data, tracking data, looking through notes, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So that's where I'm seeing focus now is kind of on the front ends, and then really, hopefully we'll get through processing. But again, I think you're always going to have a human in the loop, just because, these are important decisions that you don't typically aren't going to want the system to do automatically.
Right. No, that's great. That's great. So you've touched on this a little bit. The reality is, in most situations, we're still facing some complexity related to the legacy systems that a company might have, or disparate systems that a company might have in some way. What do you think is the most practical way to look at AI coming into this? Is it yet another overhaul, or is it more of let's find places to plug in on top of what we already have in the tech stack?
I think you want to integrate it into the process, right? I mean, you don't want to have a bolt-on, because then again, you get to the adoption issues. So if it's another system, I as an underwriter or claims adjuster have to go to, they're not going to want to use it, because it's like, I already have enough there. But from a legacy standpoint, I'm seeing a lot of folks say, hey, are there ways I can leverage AI where I don't have to do this massive transformation? So some of the approaches we are helping carriers think through, carriers or brokers, MGAs, or how can I API, take the legacy system, because it's good at a number of things, and expose the APIs so that now AI can interact and get the data that it needs at the point in time it needs it. And then you don't have to go through a massive overhaul of some of these systems. So we've got to look at, again, when I go back to what's the business process, what are you trying to fix, and what's your outcome? Because in certain cases, maybe the legacy isn't the right answer. You need to look at an AI system or a new system to do that. But again, a lot of times you can keep what you have and just expose via API or data to the AI systems to really drive those outcomes. So that's what we're seeing a lot of folks focus on.
That's great. That's great. Fantastic. So thinking of the organizations you've supported, again, particularly kind of around AI, I think we're in this era where so many of the ones that are getting started, they really don't know what success is going to feel like or what does it look like. You know, we talk about maybe ROI.
Yep.
We talk about being able to do more with less people or just with the people that we have already. Right. There's all these different ways of looking at it. I don't know if you could talk a little bit to like what you've seen be some of the realities of a successful implementation on any scale.
Yeah, and I'll start with, I kind of talked a little bit about, but we're seeing with, again, carriers on the underwriting front, by doing the, sending automated emails, we're taking some days off the time it takes for, an underwriter to rate these policies, right? If you think about it, if the AI is doing this up front and getting it to the underwriters in real time, they can focus on different things versus tracking things down and doing things like that. And then if I could go on the broker or producer side, again, the brokers, right, the carriers have a little bit of a benefit in, the brokers typically are going to send them some standard accord forms. When I talk to the brokers, they're like, why isn't anybody helping us? We can get any number of spreadsheets or anything like that. So I think that's maybe a little bit underserved, but another thing that, again, we're trying to talk to folks about, how can they, I as a broker, get this data, take all this data in and do the same thing you're doing for the underwriters, for the brokers, so they can focus more on how do they grow their business and again, write more policies and things like that versus going and, looking through spreadsheets and tracking down, do they have all they need to then get it to these carriers and things like that. And then it's also then when they get that data back, it's, I got to go evaluate, because most cases the broker has to go get some number, called 10 quotes for each policy. Now I got to look through all of them, compare and contrast. And that's a great thing for AI to do, to really summarize that for the broker to really know, hey, what's the best, policy for my kind of insured customer.
This has been great, Michael. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Nick. It's been an awesome conversation. Thanks.
Thanks for watching. You can subscribe to our show on YouTube or by following us on LinkedIn. And please consider giving us a rating or a review so it helps others to find our show. Visit StitchStudio.ai to learn more about our applied AI solution built for insurance. See you soon.